doing this morning? You doing good? It is so good to be together. My name's Brandon. If you're in this room, welcome. If you're watching online, welcome. If you are new, we would love to connect with you this week. Fill out your connection card that's in the seat back in front of you. There's also a link to it online. Love to help you connect here. And again, it is so good to be together. We're in the middle of a series called It's Okay to Not Be Okay. We are the kind of church that is willing and even eager to talk about the hard things in life and help us see how God is there with us, how God is using it. And today we're talking about anxiety. That's a conversation and something that we have all probably struggled with in this room at some time in our life, maybe even today. And if that's you today, I want you to know this message is going to be encouraging for you, and we're going to fix our eyes on Jesus as we talk about this together. So we want to share an encouraging story with you to kind of get us started into the conversation. So go ahead and take your seats. Let's watch this together.
I'm Katie Ritzesender.
And I am Carolyn Ritzesender, and I'm her mom. Overwhelming anxiety is kind of like trying to carry around a 90,000-pound gorilla with you that's screaming. And as you're trying to go to the grocery store and figure out which spaghetti sauce to buy, you have this screaming agony and it's exhausting. I'm a person with big emotions, high and low, and my anxiety got so big and so consuming in my life because of duplicity of hearing about God and the Holy Spirit in my heart and living a very worldly life. My soul was getting ripped. And at that point, I just was like, I'm done. My life is a mess. And I just surrendered. And I made this deal with God. It's like, I'll do whatever this book says. I will follow every rule that you want me to follow. If you'll just help me to eat, sleep, and breathe. I just want to function.
My anxiety acts a little different than my mom's in that it's sort of paired with OCD, where I'll get anxious about something and my OCD will latch onto that, and then it'll just loop and loop and loop and loop and loop. The way I visualize my anxiety, in my head, if I'm sitting in a chair, there's sand falling from the ceiling, and wherever my anxiety is, the sand is falling onto me, and there's that weight, and it's just continuous, and it doesn't stop, and it doesn't let up. Me and my mom, that's one of the biggest ways we connect, is we understand how scary and how bad it can get with anxiety, and that allows us to connect on a deeper level.
Having a relationship with Jesus doesn't necessarily mean the anxiety is just gone. The coping skills that I used as a kid, the way that I survived my family of origin, I used things like disassociation and managing other people to feel safe. So I used these skills as a kid that helped me cope. The problem is you carry them over into your adult life and you use these skills because that's what you know. But as an adult, they kill you. They're unhealthy. And so I think part of the healing process that Jesus wants to bring to our lives is to learn to break those triggers, to recognize them. That comes through therapy. That comes through recognizing the lies and applying God's truth to those. It comes through a lot of prayer. It comes through life groups. I can't tell you the number of times my life has been impacted by Jesus directly because of people I'm doing community with, because they can speak truth to me. I wouldn't say that I'm okay with anxiety, because anxiety is horrible. And anyone who's had it knows it's awful. But I'm okay with anxiety. I'm okay because I am with Jesus, and I know He loves me. So, yeah.
You're okay with that?
I'm okay with not trying not to say the right now, right?
Well, welcome to North Shore. You can clap. Yep. Amazing to hear stories like that. I'm so glad that you're here with us, and if you're joining us online, I am so glad that you've taken some time to be take some of your Sunday to be with us as well. We're in this series called It's Okay to Not Be Okay. Because here's the thing, we all have issues, we all have problems, we all have struggles. And sometimes in churches, there's this pressure, this sense that it's not okay to be not okay. But it's actually when we're not okay and when we bring that to God that we can actually discover more about who God is than in any other time in our lives. A writer named David Brooks once wrote these words. He said, when people remember the crucial events that form them, they don't usually talk about happiness. It's usually the ordeals that seem most significant. People shoot for happiness, but feel formed through suffering. And here's the thing about my life. I've been shaped by a number of ordeals in my life and in my story, but few more so than by what Carolyn and Katie so bravely shared about just now, this not okay part of life called anxiety. So I wanted to start today a little differently. I wanted to share just some of my own personal journey, some of my personal story with this not okay part of life that affects so many people in this room and so many people who are watching right now. Truth is, going all the way back to when I was young, I've always been sort of prone to worry. As a kid, I would worry about what my parents thought of me. In school, I would worry about my grades. When I got to high school, I started to worry about going on dates. I didn't actually go on any dates, but I would worry what they'd be like if I actually went on them. And when I was in college, I would worry about what I was going to do with my life. And then after college, I worried about why I hadn't figured out what I was going to do with my life. Worry was just something that I did somewhat recreationally. I mean, it may have been one of my spiritual gifts, if you think about it. But around my 30th birthday, this anxiety that was in me started to get worse. I started to feel stressed out about really simple, trivial, everyday things. My mind would dwell on negative thoughts and worst-case scenarios, all the what-ifs of life. What if this happened or what if that happened? I would feel tension, like actual tension in my body. Even if there was nothing wrong or nothing to worry about, I started sweating more. In fact, this got so bad that when I was preaching, I would wear 2 or 3 t-shirts under my shirt just so no one would notice. To be honest, all this worry, all this anxiety was really exhausting. It was really frustrating. And even though I was a pastor, I'd been to seminary, I knew a lot about the Bible, I didn't really know what to do about it. I didn't know how to stop it. In fact, trying really hard to not be anxious, it usually just made me feel more anxious, right? It's like trying really hard to make yourself go to sleep at night. Focusing on it will just make it get worse. So I decided to heed the advice of a friend who I had shared some of this with, and he recommended that I go see a counselor about it, which, just to name it, wasn't easy to do. That felt kind of like an admission of weakness. It felt like I was giving up. But I decided to go anyway. And I will never forget the day in that counselor's office when I heard those words, "Scott, you have anxiety." And my first response was, "No, I don't. I mean, I'm a pastor. I'm a leader. I don't have anxiety. My job's to help other people who have anxiety." But here's the thing. I knew she was right. I knew she was right, and I knew it because as soon as she said it, I started worrying about it. Like the thoughts were just kind of right there. That's just what worry does, right? And in the weeks that followed, I remembered having a lot of different emotions kind of go through my mind and my heart. I remember being really mad at God and thinking, "God, why did you make me this way? Why did you give me this challenge? What purpose could this serve other than to make my life more difficult and my ministry less fruitful?" I remember feeling this sense of shame about it. Some of you have felt, whether it's with anxiety or some other challenge in your life, this sense of shame about who you are. Like, I wouldn't have this problem if I were a better Christian, or lines like that were running through my mind. Because there was this belief in me that to be a follower of Jesus meant you shouldn't be anxious. It was almost as if the presence of anxiety somehow pointed to the absence of faith. Ever thought that? Like the presence of anxiety in my life was this revealed that I didn't have enough faith. And if that's true, my first thought was, I've got to fix this, I've got to stop this, I've got to get over this, and I certainly can't let anyone know about it. And what would that do to my leadership or my ministry? Which is why, more than anything else in that season, I just felt alone. Just alone in it. I mean, those of you who worry, you know worry, if nothing else, it's this horribly isolating experience, isn't it? Because it's all in your head, and only you know the nature and the character of your thoughts and fears. And some of you right now, you know exactly what I'm talking about, don't you? Some of you live with or have lived with this nagging anxiety. You know what it's like to feel anxious for no reason. You know what it's like to feel anxious in social situations. You know what it's like to have a panic attack. You know what it's like to feel easily overwhelmed and then helpless to do anything about it. There's a writer named Laura Turner who once said that having anxiety is like living at the intersection of uncertainty and powerlessness. And some of you have a condominium at that street corner, and that's where you do life. Some of you can't even remember not living with fear or worry or a sense of dread about the future or where your life's going. And if you can't relate to any of these things, here's the thing. There's someone in your life that can. That's just how prevalent this is. And I just want to say, I've been there too. In fact, that day in that counselor's office was just the start of a long and not always very fun journey, not to try to get over anxiety, but to figure out, how do I go through this? And because as we talked about this last Sunday, when it comes to what's not okay in our lives, the only way through it is through it. So for the next few moments, I want to unpack what anxiety is at both a spiritual level and a neurological level. And then I want us to look together at what Scripture says we can actually do when fear or worry or anxiety strikes again. And the first thing we need to be really clear about in this conversation, that we need to just understand, is that anxiety is not an inherently bad thing. I mean, it can be talked about like it's this inherently bad or evil thing, but it's not. Anxiety is actually a normal biological response to stressful or dangerous situations. In fact, at a neurological level, it's designed to actually save your life. That's its purpose. A few weeks ago, I was with my daughter Nora. We were out at a park not far from our house, and she was out playing, and I paused and looked away for just a second to get something out of the backpack. And when I looked back up, Nora was actually walking out of the park into the parking lot, kind of toward the street. And there were cars coming in and out of the parking lot and going down the street. And of course, in that moment, my body was instantly flooded with anxiety. I mean, I didn't have to think or make any choices. I instantly was up. I was running at full speed. I was yelling, "Nora, stop. Don't walk out into the street." And when she heard my voice, she stopped. She turned around. She looked at me with this sweet face and this cute voice and just said, "What's the matter, Daddy?" Right? And I'm thinking, if you had a little more anxiety, I could have a little less anxiety, right? And I told her, "Sweetheart, you can't walk out in the street like that. There's cars. They can be going too fast. They may not see you. It's why we always hold Daddy's hand when we walk across the street." And looking back, I was so grateful that my body had this surge of anxiety and stress. So grateful. I was so grateful that I didn't stop to think or come up write out an action plan. I just got up and ran. I'm so grateful that I got there in time. I'm so grateful that Nora is too young to remember to tell her mother what happened about that day. And I felt a little anxious about that. So I thought I'd wait till I was in a safe place around a lot of people, like on a Sunday at church, to tell everybody like you about that. See, anxiety is designed to help you respond to dangers or threats in your life. It's actually part of how your brain is designed to work. I don't know if you know this, but when your brain perceives something as threatening or dangerous, the amygdala at the base of your brain releases stress hormones, and your brain takes what's called a psychological stress bath. A stress bath. That's what happens when these stress hormones are released and they flood the part of your brain that's actually responsible for rational thought. Like that part of your brain kind of gets shut down, it turns off, and these stress hormones hormones enable you to run faster or respond quicker. Your whole body, your whole system is in kind of fight or flight mode to make sure that you do the right thing. So when your 2-year-old's about to walk in the road, you respond quickly and appropriately to it. That's how it works. The problem occurs when your brain gets sort of flooded too often or begins to take these kind of stress baths when there's nothing really to be stressed about. And that means the part of your brain that helps you stay calm and rational is actually getting turned off. And some of you know that flooded, dreading, stressful feeling where it feels like I just can't think straight, I can't feel calm, I can't tell myself to think differently. And you can't think your way out of it. Your brain actually can't think its way out of it. This flood of stress can take a number of forms when it begins to happen too often. It can take the form of excessive worry. And some of you, you know this, you just kind of worry recreationally. It can take the form of what's called generalized anxiety disorder, which is really just a way of having excessive or exaggerated worry about everyday life, even when there's nothing to worry about. It can take the form of specific phobias, or social anxiety disorder, or panic attacks, or obsessive compulsive disorder, or post-traumatic stress disorder. And all these forms of anxiety taken together, they affect over 40 million adults a year. That's like 20% of the population. They didn't act the same language for anxiety in the Old Testament days, but if you look through Scripture, you can actually find moments when you can hear a writer just being flooded with this sense of anxiety and dread, just as you and I do. Listen to these words from Psalm 55. The writer says, "My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen on me. Fear and trembling have beset me. Horror has overwhelmed me. I said, oh, that I had the wings of a dove. I would fly away and be at rest." And those of you who know anxiety in your life, those of you who worry, you know this place, don't you? That sense of being flooded with thoughts and you can't stop them, and there's this feeling of dread, and oh, if only you could just fly away and find peace, find rest. And by the way, this is not just a problem for adults in our day. This is something that's happening increasingly in young people in our day. National Survey of Children's Health found that between 2007 and 2012, there was a 20% increase in diagnosed anxiety in kids between 6 and 17 years old. And the average onset for anxiety in our day is around 10 or 11 years old. And I was just talking to a life group leader this week in our student ministry who's been leading the same life group of students for the past 5 years. And they said that every week when they meet, they talk about worry and anxiety. Every week. And there's no single cause for this. A lot of factors we know are a part of this can be rooted in your life experience, your family of origin, your temperament, your brain chemistry. Sometimes anxiety has triggers like stress or negative circumstances, but sometimes there's just no clear trigger at all. Even your genetics can impact anxiety. In fact, there's actually a genetic trait that we know of that some people carry that correlates with having a predisposition to worry. And some of you who worry, you're worried you have that now. You're like, a worry cycling through you, right? Like it just kind of cued it, right? What I can say for sure, and I want you to hear me on this, what I can say for sure is that anxiety is not caused by a lack of faith. Anxiety is not caused by a lack of faith. Some people will say things like, if you just pray more or read your Bible more or just trust God more, you won't be anxious, which can lead to the idea that more anxious people are less faithful people. So I want to open up a passage of Scripture with you this morning that at times has been oversimplified or even misused when it comes to anxiety. And I want us to go back to what the Bible actually says about it. So this text is from Philippians 4, starting in verse 4. If you want to follow along, Paul writes these words. He begins this way: "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near." That's where he starts. "Then do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." And I want you to flag that phrase, think about such things. We'll come back to that. "Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you." Do not be anxious about anything. Do not be anxious about anything. Do not be anxious about anything. And I don't know about you, but when I hear those words, it's like good news and bad news. It's like, wow, is that possible? And it's like, I don't know if I'll ever know that place. And it can sound like bad news because it can feel like Paul is saying, just stop being anxious already. Just get over it already. Why can't you just trust God anyway? But that's not what Paul's saying. There's a New Testament scholar named Joseph Hellerman who notes that the expression that Paul uses here doesn't mean make sure you never worry again or ever worry at all, but rather Paul is saying there's something you can do right now in your life. No matter how flooded you are with fear, there's something you can do that will put anxiety in its place. even if it's just for this one moment. And Paul actually gives 3 kind of overarching instructions in this text I want to walk through with you. The first is this. Paul says, turn to God. When you feel anxious, when your mind is racing, when you're flooded with fear, when the worries are cycling, don't see it as a sign that God has left the building, but see it as a reminder that God's right there with you in the building. Which is why Paul doesn't begin by saying, just don't worry. If you could just, stop with the worrying thing, it's kind of bothering everybody, and you're kind of a downer, and it's kind of bringing everybody down. If you just not worry, he begins by saying, rejoice because God is right here close to you. He's near. And not only is God near, God isn't anxious. He's not anxious about that problem in your family, or at school, or at work, or with your finances. He's what people sometimes call a non-anxious presence. You know that person in your life that when they walk in the room, it just feels like the air is lifted and the tension is lifted? God is a non-anxious presence. When you get anxious, God doesn't roll in nervous and frustrated saying, stop it, stop it, stop it. He says, I'm here. I'm not worried. I'm not worried. Turn to me. See, here's the thing about worry. Whenever you worry, no matter what you worry about, you'll always turn to something or someone. You're going to turn somewhere. Many of you will turn to your work, or you'll turn to busyness, or workaholism, or trying to achieve. Some of you will turn to money or the things that money will afford you. Some of us turn to kind of coping mechanisms that make us feel better, feel relief in the moment. That can be, again, busyness or fantasy or any kind of indulgence. Many of us will turn to this little word that we love. It's called control. And here's the thing. The feeling of control will feels like an antidote to worry, doesn't it? If I can just be in control, if I can just kind of get all the details together, I won't have to be afraid anymore. But here's the thing about control. Friends, control is a myth. You are not in control. We are actually in control of almost nothing. I mean, you can work out 3 times a day and go on the latest carb-free and fat-free and food-free diet, but you can't control your health. You can nag your spouse or avoid your spouse or blame your spouse, but here's the thing. You can't control your spouse. I mean, you can manage every last detail of your kids' lives. You can try to protect them from every possible bad scenario or outcome, but you cannot control what happens to your kids. You can work hard, save more, spend less, be wise with your finances, but you can't control the future. You can't control the economy. So who are you going to turn to? Where will you turn? To whom can you turn when the worry sets in? Paul's saying, here's a good idea. Turn to God. Turn to the one being in the universe who is incapable of worry. We turn to God. And by the way, this doesn't happen on accident. We have to intentionally choose to do this. We have to put aside that desire to control, put aside the coping mechanisms. We can't say, well, I'll get to God once I feel in control and once I feel relief from stress. See that? I'll go to God when I feel more in control, when I feel relief, then I can go to God. No, Paul says, in the midst of the worry, dismiss those things, turn to God, who's saying, here I am. I'm near. I'm in the room. Which leads to the second kind of theme of instructions in this text. Paul says, and then name the fear. Turn to God, but don't stop there. Don't just wait. Actually, name the fear. Speak up. In every situation, Paul says, present your requests to God. Name it. Be specific. Tell God what's happening. Which, by the way, is easier said than done, right? I mean, especially for those of us who wrestle with anxiety because we wonder what God will think of us. We wonder if God's going to be disappointed or mad or think less of us. And so we come up with all these ways, all these strategies to kind of not quite tell the truth, not quite name what we're really experiencing. I read a true story about a college student who wrote the following letter to her mom from school. She said, "Dear Mom, sorry I haven't written sooner. But my arm is broken and my left leg too. I broke them both when I jumped from the second floor of my dormitory when we had that fire. We were lucky. A young service station attendant saw the blaze and called the fire department. They were there in minutes, and I was in the hospital for a few days. But Paul, the service station attendant, came to see me every day. And because it was taking so long to get our dormitory livable again, I moved in with him. He's been so nice. I must also admit that now I'm pregnant. Paul and I have a plan to get married just as soon as he can get that divorce. I hope things are fine for you at home. Love, your daughter, Susie. P.S. None of that's actually true, but I did get a C in sociology and I flunked chemistry. And I just wanted you to receive this news in its proper perspective, right? See, we fear naming our fears, right? We fear telling the truth. We fear coming out and saying, this is what happened, this is how I feel, this is where I'm at. And so we come up with all these little strategies to not actually tell the truth. But Paul says, in every situation, name the fear. Name the fear. Not just when you feel like it, not just when you have a legitimate concern, not just when you want to pray. In every situation. When you flunk chemistry, when you're worried that he or she doesn't like you back, when you get the news, the bad news back from your doctor, when you don't get that raise that you needed to make the finances work, when your kids won't listen to you, when your parents don't seem to have time for you. Everyone listening right now is carrying some kind of fear or worry. And we spend most of our energy kind of bearing it down, trying to silence it, trying to get over it. We need to name it. And it's vulnerable. It's scary. I get it. We've got to name the fear. Which brings us to Paul's third instruction. He says, and then direct your thoughts. Intentionally direct your thoughts. He says, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, what does he say? Think about such things. And for a long time, I didn't understand that verse. It felt kind of legalistic or superficial sounding, but Paul is pointing to a principle we know a lot more about scientifically today, and it's this: how you direct your thoughts, especially when you're anxious, how you direct your thoughts matters. That you actually have the power to choose what you dwell on. A writer named Dallas Willard put it this way. He said, the ultimate freedom we have as human beings is the power to select what we will allow or require our minds to dwell upon. That's what you can control, you see. Not your circumstances, not what's happening in the world, the power of where your thoughts will go. Just this past week, I got home from a long day at work, and my mind was just cycling through a bunch of worries from that day. And I shared them with Nina, and she looked at me and said, why are you even thinking about that? And I thought, well, it's because I'm the pastor. I'm responsible for the church. It's what I'm supposed to worry about. And she grabbed my hand and she said, no, why are you choosing to think about that right now? And a light bulb came on. I woke up to the fact that I wasn't trying to think through this to solve a problem. I was just kind of brooding on it, kind of obsessing about it, kind of running through those thoughts. I was choosing to dwell on what I was worried about. And her words were like this amazing wake-up call saying, Scott, you can direct your thoughts elsewhere. That worry, it's not producing anything. You're not getting any new outcomes by it. You can direct your thoughts elsewhere. And Paul has this amazing list of possibilities, ways we can do that. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's a list of how we can get started. He says, let your mind think about whatever is true. That's a really good place to start, by the way, if you're wrestling with anxiety. Great question to ask yourself in a moment of worry is simply, is this thought true? Is this thought true? Because often it's not even close to true. Is this worry that I won't get into any college, is that true? Probably not. Is this worry that I'll never meet someone that I could actually marry, is that true? Probably not. Is this worry that this sermon is the worst sermon ever, is that true? Probably not. Though some of you looking at me like you're not sure. We're kind of working that out. Think about what is true, Paul says, and then think about whatever's noble or honorable. I love this. The word here in Greek refers to qualities in people that call forth respect or honor. And what's so interesting is that our minds, we often dwell on or brood on the opposite, right? We think about that person who acted rudely or who cut us off in traffic, and our minds just cycle over and spin on that, which just makes us more anxious. Paul says, think about someone in your life who acted in a way that was noble, honorable, loving. One of my heroes in my life is my dad. And sometimes I'll actually practice this. When I'm worried, I'll just think about my dad. I think about how he loves my mom. I think about how generous he is with his time and resources. I think about how much he loves God. And when I do that, it just brings this sense of peace into my heart. I'm thinking about what's noble or honorable. Paul says, think about whatever's right, whatever is pure. One of the best ways you can do this in your life is to practice memorizing and repeating Scripture. Just to practice, just to rehearse it, because it helps our minds dwell on and choose to dwell on thoughts that are right. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. I'll find myself almost every day just repeating that line. I know it counters that anxious thought. God is my refuge and strength, and ever-present help in time of trouble. Therefore, I will not fear, though the earth gives way and the mountains fall into the sea. And I'll sometimes go back to those words and just repeat them in my mind and think about them. And we don't do this to try to impress God. We need to know them so we can direct our thoughts to them when we need to. Paul says, think about whatever's lovely. I love this. This is a word that means whatever is attractive or beautiful. You see, our minds actually need to dwell on beauty, and it's never been more important in our day when there's so much negativity and destructiveness and ugliness in our world that we watch and follow and get all this energy from. Our minds need to dwell on beauty. It could be the view of a mountain on a sunny day. It could be the face of a person that you love or that loves you. Could be a piece of art or a beautiful piece of music. God made beauty to remind us that He is good and the world is a perfectly wonderful place to be in. Paul says, think about whatever's admirable or excellent or praiseworthy. One of the best ways I will combat anxiety or confront anxiety about how stuff is going at church is just look for people in our church who are doing amazing things. And there's so many amazing stories. I could go on. And sometimes I'll write little notes or emails to staff or volunteers when I see them going above or beyond. And I can't tell you how meaningful those notes are to them, but I can tell you this, they matter to me. And I feel peace in my heart just by writing down and letting my thoughts direct to what's excellent and praiseworthy. 2 Corinthians, Paul says, take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ. That means direct your thoughts. You can direct your thoughts. And because this can be challenging to do in our day, we wanted to kind of partner with you, come alongside you, and help you in that kind of direct your thoughts way, especially when you feel anxious. So if you have anxiety, you can just right now text that to 97000. And just this week, we're going to send out a text every day and help you, give you a tool or a word or somewhere where you can direct your thoughts just to confront the anxiety in your life, just to practice this in your life and see what happens, see if God meets you in it. And by the way, none of this works if you do this in isolation. None of this works if you do this in isolation. The you Paul refers to in Philippians is not you as an individual, it's you, the community. He's addressing a community. The best advice I've ever been given about worry is simply never worry alone. Never worry alone. That's why life groups are such a key part of life here at North Shore. If you're going to worry, you might as well worry with people that love you. And worry with others. And the result of all this is this. Look back at verse 9. Paul says, the God of peace will be with you. Not the anxiety will be gone. Not that you'll never feel worried again. The God of peace will be with you. Some of you right now, you're worried, you're stressed about your marriage or relationship. And here's the thing. I can't tell you what's going to happen. But the God of peace will be with you. Some of you are worried about a situation in your family or with your health. And I don't know what lies ahead for you, but I can tell you this, the God of peace will be with you. Some of you are worrying about a struggle or a problem and it feels overwhelming. You're not sure how to solve it. And I'm not sure I could solve it either, but here's what I know. The God of peace is with you. See, as it turns out, living with anxiety is not as much about finding peace, it's about finding the God of peace. And that changes everything. And let me say, this journey of walking with anxiety, it will take not less courage, but more courage. Years ago, I thought having anxiety meant I was fearful and weak, but the truth is, living with anxiety takes more courage than most people will ever know. It takes courage to turn to God and not to some other coping mechanism. It takes courage to admit it and to ask for help. It takes courage to get counseling and get help. It takes courage to take medication if you need it. It takes courage to live with fear. Let me just say that again. I want you to hear this. It takes courage to live with fear. But the God of peace will be with you. And that's been true for me. I've learned more about God through battling anxiety and getting counseling and surrendering my need to be in control than any book or class I've ever read or been part of. And here's what's so cool. The past few years of my life, just back to my story, have been a season of real healing for me in this. About a year and a half after we moved here, Nina said, Scott, you don't seem very anxious anymore. And I thought, who would have thought that God could use becoming a new dad and moving to a new state and becoming a senior pastor could actually make me less anxious? But he did. But even if he didn't, and even if worry returns, the God of peace will still be with me. And here's the thing, he will still be with you. Which is why you need to turn to him and name that fear and learn those practices of directing your thoughts and do it in community with each other so that you can experience not just peace, but the God of peace who's in the room right now. So let's pause and let's talk to him about whatever we're worried about. So if you'd bow your heads, close your eyes. And here's what I'd like you to do just for a moment. With everybody's eyes closed, I want to say a prayer over those of you who are carrying a specific worry or fear in your heart or your mind. And so with nobody looking, if you're worried right now, I just want you to raise your hand about whatever you may be worried about. Just raise your hand. Okay, you can put them down. And here's what I want you to know right now. There was more than one hand, okay? You are not alone. God has you in this room for a reason. To remind you that you can turn to him. You can be honest about whatever fear you have. He's not disappointed or ashamed of you. And you're not weak. In fact, when you're trusting him, even when you're afraid, God says that's what makes you strong in his eyes. And so, Jesus, I pray over every worry in this room, every fear, that your presence would just saturate this place, that your life, your death, your resurrection would be around us, before us, behind us, in and through us. It would be with us when we wake up in the morning, when we go to bed at night. It would carry us through every decision, every worry. Jesus, you are that God of peace. You gave your life for every moment that we fear. And you're here in this room to remind us that we don't have to be afraid, but even if we are, you will be faithful and you will be with us. And so we want to sing these words and reflect on these words about your presence being with us always, Jesus. Be with us, O God of peace. And everybody said, amen.